Welcome to another episode of the Jampack Report today for December the 1st of 2020. Of course, this is a daily gaming news podcast where we have been covering everything regarding the next generation console launch and the lineup that fans are digging into currently. And one of the fans digging into that launch lineup is Phil Spencer, who says he is pretty impressed by the DualSense controller on the PlayStation 5. While the Xbox Series controller is largely the same as the Xbox One controller, just with some minor tweaks, which plays into Microsoft's plans of backward and forward compatibility going into this generation, Sony went the other direction. The PlayStation 5's controller, dubbed the DualSense, is the most radical redesign for a PlayStation controller since the PS1, and it does have a lot of new features, such as adaptive triggers and haptic feedback, which is being implemented in various different ways in various different games. Speaking with The Verge, Phil Spencer seems to be a fan of the new controller. He said he applauds what Sony did with the DualSense and thinks that everyone in the industry can take bits and pieces from each other, even calling back to the Wii having a major impact on Microsoft with their Kinect project. Quote, I applaud what they did with the controller, not actually for, well, I shouldn't say not for the specifics of the controller, but more than just the specifics of the controller, he said. I think for all of us in the industry, we should learn from each other and the innovation that we all push on, whether it's distribution of business model like Game Pass or controller tech or the Wii back in the day, which clearly had an impact on us when we went off and did Kinect and Sony did the move. The DualSense is neat, and it will be interesting to see if the features continue being used in third-party games after this honeymoon launch period. And if they do, it would not be too far-fetched to see Microsoft do their own thing with that tech in an Xbox Series controller redesign or a new Elite controller down the line. I think that last paragraph is really the shining star of this article here, because there's no getting around the fact that the DualSense brings a lot more innovation to the table for the PlayStation 5 as compared to what the Xbox Series controller brings to the Xbox Series X and S, because ultimately the only change for the Xbox Series X and S controller is the fact that the share button is now physical instead of being one that's hidden in the UI. And so with that in mind, it now comes down to third-party developers to actually utilize the DualSense and prove that it's worth its weight in development time and therefore development gold. And if these third parties do continue innovating and using the DualSense in their games, then Xbox has more of an incentive to bring it into their ecosystem and to release a redesigned Xbox Series controller or perhaps release an Elite controller that does bring in adaptive triggers and more intense haptic feedback. That's when you'll see innovation from Microsoft. But right now, Sony is blazing the trail and Microsoft has an opportunity to follow if they do so choose. But if Sony's trail that they're blazing ends up going nowhere, then Microsoft has no harm, no foul. They continue going on their very merry way. Now that is not to say that there is no haptic feedback in the Xbox Series controller. I'm enjoying my time with Tetris Effect Connected, having a fantastic time with that, and it's very much so more detailed. I see the Xbox Series X controller more akin to the HD Rumble in a Nintendo Switch controller as compared to the DualShock 4 or the DualShock 3's Rumble. And so with that in mind, the Xbox still brings plenty to the table in terms of haptic feedback, but it's not that same experience that the DualSense does bring. And you're already seeing a discrepancy between what first parties are making and what third parties are making. Obviously, Sony is always going to take advantage of the haptic feedback and the adaptive triggers on games like God of War and Ratchet & Clank and the next Spider-Man and the next Last of Us. These big games are going to be getting this support. But already I have friends that have a PlayStation 5 and they say Assassin's Creed Valhalla doesn't really bake much of the adaptive triggers or haptic feedback into the controller at all. So if big names like Ubisoft aren't using them, then perhaps it might fall to the wayside for other big companies and even indie companies that are considering using these features. It really comes down to how development goes over the course of the next few years. That's when you'll see the innovation come, if it does show its need. But ultimately, Phil Spencer is a fan of the PS5, so I would expect this to be baked into some kind of Xbox design in the future if the tech proves its worth. But new leaked PlayStation research explains that single-player games are thriving. In leaked PlayStation internal data, we learn about how the PlayStation 5's Activities feature came to be and that single-player games are thriving. In a report from Vice, leaked internal PlayStation data shows that single-player games are thriving. The data also breaks down how the PlayStation 5's Activities section came to be. In regards to single-player games, PlayStation points out common worries by players such as if they'll have enough time to play a single-player game or how to talk about it without spoilers. As Sony points out, while it would be great for everyone to spend hours playing games, most people have other responsibilities, whether it be having children or having full-time jobs. With that in mind, PlayStation wondered how they can make single-player games a larger part of people's free time. Quote, "We can change 'should I start playing' to 'which part should I start playing'," reads a slide next to a screenshot from Uncharted. "The options are there, the choices are clear, the game is calling. Pick up that controller, it's time to play." With the Activities section, which debuted in the PlayStation UI video, they'll give you time estimates for certain tasks. As PlayStation points out in the presentation, the way cards are used can vary from game to game. For something like Spider-Man Miles Morales, you can use the cards to play a main story mission or side quest, and it will tell you how long it takes. For other games like Astro's Playroom and Demon's Souls, you can use the Activities section to jump between different levels or worlds. They can also show you how far you are getting towards getting certain collectibles, and as a whole, it's a feature that can make certain things more palatable to players, whether it be getting every collectible or finishing the game story in between your busy life. This is very important because I'm experiencing this now, and I know that not everybody is in the same spot in life, but I'm in between college and adulthood. I'm in my first real job after college, and throughout the entire PlayStation 4 generation, I was in high school and college. I was able to play hours and hours and hours of games. Whenever God of War came out, I think I played roughly between 18 and 20 hours in like one day. When Uncharted The Lost Legacy launched, I binged the entire thing in like 12 hours. I just rented it from Redbox back when that was a thing you could do. And I had the time to invest. Spider-Man 2018, when that came out, I played through the entire game in a week and platinumed it. I had so much free time. Now, I have rent to pay, I have bills to pay, I have a cat to feed, and even then I have more time than the majority of adults in the world. I'm single, I have nothing that's taking up my time, so I can sit down and play these big games, but even now, I can't play for 6 or 7 hours like I used to be able to. Now, it's generally me tapping out at about 2 or 3 saying, I've got some stuff to do, I should go do that. And on top of that, you have people that are much, much busier with families, with bigger mortgage payments, with a lot more worries, especially in today's world. And so the Activities feature is a way to get people back into the ecosystem. And I think that without this Activities feature, you continue to see the trend of the tweets where you see you picked up an Xbox 360 controller and you didn't realize that would be the last time. It's one of those things where people just fade out and they stop gaming because life takes hold and they begin to transition out of that period of life and into another one. But PlayStation and their Activities feature, they're trying to bridge that gap to where you don't have the dad that stopped playing video games in 2003 whenever somebody was born. No, you have somebody that is changing the way they play games and changing the approach to the way that they digest the experiences they are having. And instead of sitting down and grinding through the entire game in the traditional sense, you have somebody that's sitting down and saying, okay, I'm playing Spider-Man Miles Morales. I'm going to go do 6 side missions before I go to bed. And that might take an hour. Or I'm going to have 30 minutes between this conference call since I'm working from home during the pandemic. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go complete that mission. Whatever it might be, the Activities feature lets you bake gaming into your daily life to where even if you do have a lot going on, you can probably still find the time. And for Sony, from a corporate level, this gets more players back into the ecosystem. Because if an adult thinks they don't have time to play games, then they aren't going to invest in a PlayStation 5 or games to come with it. But if they see the Activities feature and see in their daily life, I have 45 minutes here, let me fill that with this, then they might go ahead and invest. And so that gets more people back into gaming. And so ultimately, it makes gaming more palatable. It brings people back in. And of course, this is something that as I continue to get busier and busier, I would definitely enjoy that kind of feature. Of course, Xbox doesn't really have anything akin to that right now. There is the quick resume feature, but there's nothing that's really like what PlayStation is bringing in terms of you can just dive into a game. You can just dive into a mode. And again, will third parties support this? That's still yet to be seen. But ultimately, these first-party games are absolutely going to be taking advantage of it, and for good reason, because these single-player games are thriving. So your Last of Us Part 2s, your Ghost of Tsushimas, your Spider-Mans, your God of Wars, these are all going to be able to really take advantage of what this has to offer. But as more and more people are staying at home amid the COVID-19 lockdowns, time and money spent on games is increasing. During the pandemic, people have turned to video games to pass the time, connect with friends, and just enjoy themselves. New data from the NPD Group has provided a new level of detail on just how popular gaming has become in recent months. In short, it's up across the board. The number of people in the US who play video games has risen to 79%, and total time spent on gaming jumped by 26%, while the total amount of money spent on games has increased by 33%. According to NPD's numbers, 4 out of every 5 US consumers have played a video game in the last 6 months. This trend of growth is reflected across platforms, but mobile is a special bright spot, the report said, thanks to its nature as an accessible platform. The popularity of console gaming has also increased as families look for ways to play together, while others are seeking out consoles to play together with others online. The NPD report also mentions that demographics that are historically less interested in gaming, those 45 years of age or older, are on the rise in the medium. Those in the 45 to 54 age bracket saw an increase of 59% in terms of time spent gaming and a 76% increase on money spent on games. Those in the 55 to 64 age bracket saw their time spent gaming rise 48% and money spent on games grow by 73%, while those 65 and older experienced an increase of 45% playing games and 29% on spending. Quote, this year, video games is one of the most consistent growth categories in terms of overall participation and investment relative to 2019, NPD's Matt Piscatella said in a statement. This may simply reflect an acceleration of trends that were in effect prior to the pandemic, and if this is the case, then the gaming market could experience continued growth without a post-pandemic pullback. If not, however, we may see a post-pandemic valley before returning to growth, and all rest on engagement, end quote. The results of this study come from an online survey conducted in August of 2020 in the US, and 5,000 people took part in the survey. Now, I will say 5,000 people is not a huge sample size, but there are still some calculations we can make on this. Obviously, gaming is continuing to grow. And while some people may not have been gaming before the pandemic, the fact that they're picking up their phone and downloading an app, or they're grabbing a console while they're at the store, that is continuing to accelerate gaming's growth. Because while some people will drop off after life returns to normal and vaccines are distributed and life resumes, without the pandemic being a factor, you will still have people that are continuing to play, that continue gaming, and they get, interested in baking that into their daily life. Now, the question is, how much of that growth is going to negate the decline when more people go back to work, more people delete these apps, more people are resuming what they've been doing for the past 10 years, and they don't have as much free time right now. Will that decline be negated by the continued rise of gaming? I think at the very least you'll see a plateau. I don't think this accelerated growth is going to continue, but will we see a decline? That ultimately, again, like Matt Piscatella said, depends on the engagement. But really, it still is impressive here, and I think that mobile is a standout success because while mobile gaming gets a bad rap, there are some fantastic experiences out there. I think to games like Call of Duty Mobile that really do bring a fully fleshed out Call of Duty experience to a mobile device. It's very, very fun. You should really try it. It's a pretty good time. Then I think about these huge games like Genshin Impact. I mean, that's a game that's on the PlayStation 4 and PC, but it's also very lively on mobile as well. And so you see this growth continue, and I think you are going to see these trends. If they don't, plateau, you'll see a slight continued growth, but not the giant skyrocket that we see right now. In my personal opinion, again, I am not a professional gaming industry analyst, but that's just my 2 cents. But VR spending is set to pass $1 billion in 2020. Market analyst Omdia says 6.4 million VR headsets will be sold this year. Of course, according to the latest research by market analyst firm Omdia, VR content revenue will reach $4 billion by 2025, 90% of which will be from games by then. The combined hardware and software value of VR will be worth $10 billion in 2025, growing from $3.2 billion in 2020. The report highlighted an increased growth of VR in 2020 due to COVID-19 lockdowns. However, it pointed out that this growth was also limited by manufacturing challenges in the first half of 2020 and the November launch of next-gen games consoles, diverting gamers' attentions and budgets. The household penetration of VR by the end of the year will be 1.2% across the 32 countries Omdia analyzed. This number will rise to 3% in 2025, showing that there is still a long way to go before VR is massively adopted. The launch of standalone headsets such as the Oculus Quest have broadened the appeal of VR though, the research showed. Out of the 6.4 million headsets sold this year, 3.3 million were standalone, and Omdia estimated that 1.2 million units of Quest devices will be sold by the end of 2020, rising to 5.6 million units by 2025. Of course, they go on to talk more about Facebook and the Oculus Quest 2, but VR spending is continuing to rise. And this is strange because, and they mention this at the end of the article, Jim Ryan says that the future of VR is more than a few minutes away. It's not going to be something that continues to grow at the rate that people were expecting it to a few years ago. But I do think there is a future for VR, but I would consider myself to be in the 97 to 98.5 percentile, where I don't have a need for a VR headset. It's still an accessory. It's still a complementary experience to my television in my living room. And I think that's where a lot of people see this kind of technology. Because while I have had people in my life that have tried VR and that they vouch for it and they stand by it and they say it's this monumental experience, in the world of gaming, I can only think of two games that I want to play, Beat Saber and Half-Life Alyx. Of course, there are some on the PlayStation VR that I do want to play, but anything else I can really just play on a regular PC. And so until you do have these, in a way, console selling, and I'm using air quotes there for the audio listeners, in a way, until we have these console selling experiences, I don't really have a need to go out and buy a VR headset. And on top of that, I think that a lot of people are probably in my same boat as well, where while I would like to have a VR headset, I feel like the technology is still emerging. You know, I look back to the original headsets that were popular a few years ago, you know, these first Oculus headsets, these first Valve headsets, what's it called? The Valve something. There are plenty of them out there. The HTC Vive is another example. Those were pathetic compared to what we have now, and they were thousands and thousands of dollars. So I don't want to invest tons and tons of money into a VR headset that is going to be outdated and basically bad within 6 to 8 months, which this technology is evolving at such a rate that I don't want to invest in it right now. And so I think that a lot of people are probably in that boat as well, but VR is continuing to prove that it's not going away, and it is continuing to grow. But to round out today's show, you can rip and tear it next week on the Nintendo Switch with Doom Eternal set to launch. Doom Eternal will be released on Nintendo Switch on December the 8th, Nintendo and Bethesda Softworks announced on Monday. Doom Eternal was released on PS4, Stadia, PC, and Xbox One in March, with a Nintendo Switch release date expected later in the year. The wait is almost over, Nintendo posted in a YouTube trailer Monday. Get ready to conquer demons when Doom Eternal comes to Nintendo Switch on December the 8th. In an FAQ published on the Bethesda website, the company said the game will be digital only, available through the Nintendo Switch eShop and through digital codes from other retailers. Doom Eternal's The Ancient Gods Part 1 downloadable content will be released at a later date. People who have already pre-ordered the game ahead of the release date may have had their pre-orders canceled, Bethesda said. The company said to reach out to your retailer for instructions. Doom Eternal's expected storage size on the Nintendo Switch is 18.8 gigabytes according to Bethesda, and of course at Polygon they call Doom Eternal a worthy follow-up to 2016's Doom with a shooter with greater scope and clearer intent. Very fun game. In fact, probably in the running for my game of the year. That remains The Last of Us Part 2 for me personally, but Doom Eternal is a fantastic first-person shooter. In a way, the mechanics and the gunplay work hand in hand to create this kind of Guitar Hero-esque trance that you get into, where you just know what moves you need to make to just rip and tear in the most glorious, beautiful way possible. Is it a rhythm game? No, but kind of. In my opinion, it's strange, but it's very good. Of course, you have a lot of people in the Twitter comment section saying, this game looks horrible. It's probably in 660p, upscaled to 720p on the Nintendo Switch. Why are the textures so low? I can assure you that anybody that wants to play Doom Eternal on the Nintendo Switch does not care about resolution or frame rate. If they did, they would be playing on the Xbox Series X, the PlayStation 5, a PC, other consoles. Doom Eternal on the Switch is existing purely to, number one, play Doom Eternal on the go, but number two, say that you have Doom Eternal on the Nintendo Switch. And to be fair, the game itself looks really good. I mean, you can see that the textures are lower and the frame rate is not 60, but it still doesn't look bad. This is an experience that I'm sure is going to be fine. It's going to be fun. And Doom Eternal itself, just from a gameplay and mechanics perspective, is a good time. I would highly, highly, highly recommend diving in and giving it a shot if you are interested in seeing what Doomslayer was up to earlier this year. But that rounds out today's episode of the Jampack Report. If you enjoyed today's show, drop me a like down below and let me know what you think about the DualSense controller. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you have it? And do you want one? And of course, do you think that third parties are continuing to support it in 5 or 10 years? Would love to see what you have to say. But until tomorrow, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon, and peace.